and power plants. After 4 years of action, we're already seeing positive results in terms of emissions reductions and job losses. So I wondered if you could just elaborate a little bit more on this just transition strategy, its progress, and how the Spanish government is using it to integrate national climate objectives and the just transition aims. So
sure.
Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Coltrane, for your introduction. So the situation in Spain, I think it is quite remarkable to say that we are in a scenario of complete coal phase out. So basically all coal mines closed down in 2018, and all coal power plants are currently under closure, either already closed or with plans of being closed down by 2025 approximately. So confronting this situation, the Spanish government elaborated a just transition strategy with an urgent plan of action for coal regions. And the first materialization of the just transition strategy were tripartite agreements between the national government, involved companies, and trade unions. And this experience is, I think, is an example of that has worked very well in Spain and that for sure can be exported to other countries. So through these tripartite agreements, they were one for coal mines, one for coal power plants. Through this agreement, of course, the national government committed to deploying support instruments for coal regions. But what's interesting is that trade unions were also involved, and they were committed to verify, monitor, and provide feedback into the process. And companies owning, for example, coal power plants, committed to relocate all their workers, prioritize auxiliary workers in new activities, and invest in new economic activities in the very same territories where coal power plants were closing down. So against a conventional laissez-faire scenario where you have a coal power plant closing down, nothing has happened here, we don't care, we have a convened, a consensualized scenario with the public administration, with companies and with trade unions, all of them agreeing on a planned, organized close down process with commitments by the very same companies that are closing down coal for workers and territories, right? What's the national government doing in all this? Well, in the framework of just transition agreements with regional and local administration, we are deploying a series of support instruments. We are providing support for SMEs in the same territories, for new investments and job creation. We are supporting new infrastructure and municipal projects in order to improve public services so that people stay in coal regions and have a new feature in coal regions. We are providing support, social support for workers affected by the closure of coal mines, which is a very difficult situation, but because in the case of coal mines, companies some coal companies in Spain exploited coal to a situation of bankruptcy. So afterwards, they were not in a situation, they disappeared as companies, so they could not provide social measures or environmental measures for the territory. So that's the national government stepping in. We are also investing in innovation. You can see how a lot of hydrogen projects are going to coal regions in Spain, because in our 8 calls for hydrogen investments, we are prioritizing coal regions in order for there to be a transition from black to green, let's say. And the result of all of this is that approximately no. According to our calculations, we are creating as much jobs in these regions as were affected by the coal phase-out process. Of course, we have a lot of work yet to do, because we need these projects to be implemented, but it seems like we are going on the right path and that we are implementing the right policies.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm not sure if this... I think that is better.
Perfect.
Right, great. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you for the comprehensive answer and the kind of highlighting the importance of a kind of structured and kind of intended approach to avoiding the laissez-faire attitude. So I'll move now to the other side of the world. So Stephen Bryan, Australia is much earlier in its transition journey. The Labour government signed the JT Declaration at last year's COP27, and more recently created the Net Zero Authority in May 2023, which aims to provide strategic coordination for the transformation to a clean energy economy and engage the most affected workers and communities. So yeah, in a similar way to that Julian elaborated, I wondered if you could tell us more about the kind of climate objectives of the Australian government and how they're planning to align this with the just transition principles.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, is this? Yeah, we're good. Yeah. Hi everyone. My name's Steve. Full disclosure, I lead on Just Transition Work Program and Response Measures here for Australia, and I don't work for the Net Zero Economy Agency, but we work closely together trying to align Australia's international and domestic priorities, and I can speak to you a little bit about some of the work that they've been doing. So Australia is undergoing a massive transformation at the moment. It's quite ambitious, and we're looking to reduce our emissions by 43% by 2030 on the way to net zero by 2050. We're also looking to increase the share of renewables in our grid to 82% by 2030. So we're talking a massive transformation in a few years. And we're also implementing a suite of policies to facilitate the transition. This is about developing new industries to capitalise on the transition, decarbonising existing industries, and also a transition of the workforce, particularly in our non-urban regions. And we're also establishing a net zero authority, as you mentioned, to ensure that the workers, industries and communities that have powered Australia can capitalise on the benefits and the opportunities of the transition. So this is a body that's going to be enshrined in legislation, but until this is legislated, Australia has set up a Net Zero Economy Agency, and that's been established to provide some guidance on the establishment of the authority. And so this is going to be led by an independent chair with an advisory board. And so the agency will kickstart the work of the authority by helping investors and companies to engage with some of the opportunities of the transformation, coordinating the different policies and programs across government to attract investment, and supporting the workers that are affected in some of these regions to access new employment and skills. So the agency has met with over 200 different stakeholders as part of their engagement. This includes local government, industry, unions, community groups and First Nation groups, and I'll share some of the findings that they found. So firstly, one of the key findings they found is every region is unique in terms of the challenges and the opportunities. Secondly, we found that effective transition requires joined up action across different levels of government. Any incremental one-off poorly coordinated actions risk being ineffective. And finally, we found that industry players are really committed to achieving net zero, and they have exciting and innovative ideas to share.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now moving to Diana, representing the workers and trade unions. So the Just Transition Centre itself was established in 2016 by the ITUC and partners, and works with stakeholders to accelerate the just transition through the empowerment of workers and their allies, supporting social dialogue processes and providing input to just transition planning and policies. So I just wondered if you could highlight some of the specific activities of the Just Transition Centre, the activities that they're undertaking to support just transition planning, and perhaps highlight, in addition to some of the other comments we've had, specific elements that are key for any country, region, organisation to include within just transition strategies from your perspective.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Yeah, mostly as you mentioned, what we do is to support our affiliates. We represent 200 million workers in all the sectors. So what we do is to support them in the process of transitioning. So we work a lot with different communities, for example, with the Spanish unions, but also with the unions in Brazil, in Colombia, in South Africa, Indonesia, all around the world. Wherever they need it, we are there to support them. So we we support these processes of dialogue, and we encourage them to follow the different steps, to engage with employers, with the governments. So it's mostly the key role that we have as the Just Transition Center. The key elements that we think that are needed, I would say that we should follow the case of Spain, but because we really think that it's a good case, because they have followed all the steps that we think that everyone should follow. It's true that this is not that one size fits for all, because each country has its own peculiarities, has its own natural resources. So it's true that we cannot use the same example for everyone, but the key basis has to be the same for all. And what we understand is the first one is the social dialogue. Is dialogue engaging with the parties, with the stakeholders that are relevant. And we will say that it has to be following the ILO guidelines on just transition. Mustafa is not here yet, but I'm sure that he will mention that. The ILO guidelines are focused on this process of dialogue between the governments, employers, and unions. So for us, that's the key part. So if you start talking to the unions, the workers, and all the relevant actors, you will be able to develop that plan. And that's the good thing from the Spanish case, that it's not only telling them what you are to do, what you are planning to do. No, it's involving them in the plans, in the negotiation, but also in the follow-up. Because this has been a process, and this is not done in 1 year, 2 years, 5. This is going to be a long process, and you need to involve them entirely. But also something that we need to look for is about the future jobs. What are the jobs that are coming when you are closing, for example, a coal plant, thermal power plant? If we talk about nuclear in other cases, wherever oil, whatever industry that you are thinking to close or to change, because you could also modify it, and we are seeing a lot of cases, for example, refineries that are being transformed to biorefineries, or now they are producing, in the case of Spain as well, in the north, in Petronor, they are producing hydrogen, green hydrogen. So you need to see all these developments and to think what are going to be the future jobs and how those workers are going to be able to make that transition. What do you need to give them? The skills, the skilling, reskilling, the training, and information about the future jobs that for us has to be decent jobs with guarantees, with social protection, unionized jobs, that they can have the right to collective bargaining, the right to be part of a union. So for us, there are some key bases that we need. It will be also to have a time frame. When you start a process like this, you need to know more or less in how much time do you need to achieve your goals, the goals that you are thinking, but also the budget. You need to have a budget to develop all this. We are talking here in this COP and from the past 2 years from climate finance and how important this is for the transition. Because what we cannot do is that workers pay the price of this transition. It has to be divided between everyone. So we should find the tools in order to guarantee this process. And something really important for us is also the follow-up, as I mentioned, and to create just transition committees that can work in the implementation of these plans, but also that can follow up. And something really good from Spain as well, and that is also happening in Colombia, for example, is the creation of a Just Transition Institute. So it's the organism, in the case of Spain, that depends from the government, that follows up the implementation of those plans. You need to follow up to see if this is working or is not working. So those are all the elements that I think that are relevant. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Institutional capacity is something that is coming up in a lot of the discussions that we've been having here at the Just Transition, at the COP, and also obviously climate finance is in every discussion. So that leads quite nicely onto perhaps the case study from Colombia, and a developing country that again is kind of leading amongst developing countries in the just transition. Colombia outlined a roadmap for a just energy transition in 2022 to gradually phase out fossil fuels under principles of equity, graduality, sovereignty, and reliability. Andres, could you tell us a little bit more about the Republic of Colombia's approach and again, how the government is harnessing the just transition to achieve its climate objectives?
Yes. I start to say one of the elements in the just transition is the energy, because it represents the 30.7% in the in the national inventory of emission in Colombia. So we start for this. To achieve the climate goals and commitments, Colombia submitted the update of the national contribution determinate in 2020, and it's to commitment to reduce 51% of the gas emission, of the greenhouse gas emission by 2013. So I think it's a big ambition to
51.
reduce. 51, yes, 51%.
Right.
Yes, yes, so I think it's a big ambition of Colombia has. One of these elements, in this order, in 2021, Colombia launched in the framework of COP26 its long-term climate strategy. One of these is related with diversify the energy matrix. And in this sense, in 2021 also, Colombia issued the law of energy transition, promoting the energy renewable, expanding the spectrum on another source like hydrogen, because we have a lot of potential in this element, and to export also. And another renewable energy like solar and wind, because we have identified a lot of potential in this source. So, for the other hand, the other ministers are working in the workforce, in the transition of the workforce, because in the future we expect to reduce the use of the oil and gas source, and we have to look for with these people, with these communities, to work in this company. So the Ministry of Labor are working in this strategy to close the to close the gaps in these green jobs, and to look the other dimension of this transition, like gender, intergenerational, and of course the climate justice. So this is we are working in all of these strategies.
Fantastic, thank you. And yeah, as I mentioned just prior to your intervention, ambitious targets.
We start to implement all of these strategies in the next year. So I'm hoping to reduce and achieve these goals.
Fantastic. I'd like to welcome Mustafa Kamal Gay onto our panel, who is, as was introduced previously, the head of Just Transition at the ILO. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll take an intervention from you now, as we've had interventions from the rest of the panel. So the ILO and its tripartite constituency continues to be at the forefront of the Just Transition discussion. The Just Transition guidelines that were mentioned previously by Diana, that were established in 2015, were reaffirmed recently at the International Labour Conference. So I just wondered if you could let us, first of all, perhaps building on ILO's experience and research, maybe you could highlight some of the mechanisms and tools that have worked best to incorporate climate ambition with just transition. And then I know also that the ILO is currently in the process of developing an action plan to kind of give effect to the conclusions of the just transition. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about how you hope that will support governments, workers and employers associations, as well as other stakeholders.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to the ILO, and apologies for being late because I was asked to join the Secretariat on the UN agencies, support to the global stock take, so that we reflect collectively how UN agencies could support, and it took longer. But in relation to your questions, I think the first one is that we see increasingly countries putting in place national policies and strategies for a just transition. It is not a large number of countries, but this is already encouraging, and that gives effect to the principles in the Paris Agreement on climate change. And I also wanted to note that in 2019, the UN Secretary General mandated the ILO to support this initiative called Climate Action for Jobs, where countries were invited to commit to put in place national policies and strategies for a just transition. And at the time, the Secretary General also requested the government of Spain and the government of Peru to be the drivers of this social and political driver track. So we had the opportunity to work with the leadership of Spain and Vice President Ribera to engage with a number of countries to get them to formally commit to put in place policies and strategies for a just transition. At the time, we had 46 countries that made that firm commitment. So as we speak, we now have 49 countries. The last include Nigeria, Mauritania, and the United States. And so this is already a good signal. But what we are also seeing is an effort to bring just transition in the NDCs. Now, on that part of really reflecting decent work and just transition in NDCs, it's not a large number of countries. We have been able, we in the ILO, to work with UNDP, UNDP having been the agency to support countries on their NDCs, but I must say we were able to do that only when project funding was available, like in Dominican Republic, in Costa Rica, in Nigeria, and that's what I just was saying in the global stock take now. If we are serious about countries bringing seriously decent work and just transition in their NDCs, there must be mechanisms in climate financing to support that social dimension of climate action. So at the moment it is not the case. As you know, we International Labour Organization are not accredited in any of the climate funding mechanism. It's now almost 8 years since the ILO submitted an accreditation dossier to the Green Climate Fund. It's still sitting there. We're not in the Global Environment Facility. We're not in the Adaptation Fund. So I think this challenge of making sure that the social dimension, just transition, they are financed through climate mechanisms are important. But now technically, what we think is happening in countries which is interesting is about 3 areas. The first is that countries are trying to do some analysis and research to get a sense of whatever policies and measures they are putting for climate action, what would be the potential impacts on jobs, on income, on enterprises, you know, the labor market impact. We think that they're trying to get a sense of the nature and scale of those impacts, because that will be helping them align their labor policies with climate. The second is that increasingly they are also seeing the need for social policy. Countries are paying more attention to social protection, skills development, occupational safety in relation to climate change. And we think that policy coherence is what is needed for climate ambition, because we are not tackling a sole environmental problem. We all understand that climate action is about economic and social transformation. It cannot happen if policies don't touch upon fiscal policy, labor market policies, etc. The third element is the consensus building. This is not a business for governments only. Governments have to work with trade unions, they have to work with employees' organizations, and for us in the world of work, it is about social dialogue. And like the ITUC usually says, social dialogue is not sitting and have a coffee. It's a whole process. It's a structured engagement modality. So we see that happen in a few countries, but not too many. And finally, you refer to the conclusions of the International Labour Conference, where, as you know, in June this year, the conference had a specific discussion on a just transition, which resulted in conclusions and recommendations, which I think bring three things that are very important in this process. The conclusions provide us with elements of definition of a just transition. So what it means is, in the discussions here on the Just Transition Work Program, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There are elements of definition. The second is the policy framework for just transition. The conference endorsed the Iowa guidelines for just transition as the central reference for policy making and basis of action. So parties can build on that policy framework. And the third element is about financing. So I mentioned it earlier, but it speaks specifically about financing for a just transition. And so we're very much looking forward to exploring concrete ways to do that and working together in that direction.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive answer there and outlining the body of knowledge that exists already from the ILO and the experiences of countries so far. So we have approximately 10 minutes left, and before I ask the panel for perhaps a final key takeaway and lesson learned from this discussion, we could keep going for a lot longer, I'm sure. I just wanted to see whether there are any questions in the audience. Now would be a good time. We have one at the back there. Go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe he needs a microphone for, I don't know.
Sergio?
Do we have a microphone for?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Hi, my name is Bas van Weegberg. I'm from the FNV, the Dutch trade union. I have a question for Andres Armando. You were talking about hydrogen and the opportunities for hydrogen export for Colombia. My country, the Netherlands, but also other European countries are eagerly looking for opportunities to import hydrogen. And what we see is that in these contracts there mostly are no social clauses, conditions. And I'm curious as to what is your perspective on these social clauses within import/export contracts in the hydrogen world. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. Yes, we expect to export, but now we aren't exporting because we don't have the means of implementation this process. We are working in define the medium to transport the hydrogen, and produce. And we have right now we have projects and to produce, and we are to start research about it, but we don't have a big produce about it. So when we define the means of implementation, I hope we can start to export, because we have identified a big potential to produce these resources for the big rivers we have. The rivers is close to the maritime transport, so we expect to in the future to can export the hydrogen. But right now, it's only a project. Thank you.
Great. And yeah, I think we've got time for one more quick question. So please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Alexia Faust. I'm at the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, and I work on policy coherence for just transitions. One of the things we're doing here at COP actually is doing a survey on understanding people's views on just transitions. And what we found is that there's a lot of heterogeneity. So here, what I've gotten from this panel is that it's mostly about workers and about transitioning fossil fuel workers to other forms of employment. But I guess a question for Mr. Kamal is, how do you deal with all these different interpretations of just transition in your work? And how does policy coherence help with that? Thank you.
Great question. Kamal.
Oh, well, thank you for the question. Well, we of course speak of just transition being centrally about transition in the labor markets. But I want to say that while in the Paris Agreement there is a very specific reference to just transition of the workforce, we also understand that just transition matters for communities, for enterprises, and that is why the ILO guidelines, they speak of a just transition for all. And that's within that framework that we work, because workers' organizations are also engaging with employees' organizations and governments to make it work. But where I think your question on policy coherence is a bit of a challenge for now, is that I referred to the guideline to the Labour Conference in June. We have 187 members of the ILO. They are basically the same countries, the same governments who negotiated and adopted the outcomes of the Labour Conference. They come here in Dubai and they talk about the same issue, but somehow reinventing the wheel. Some of the questions they're asking here, how do you define just transition? They've talked about it in Geneva, and they reach consensus among governments, trade unions. So therefore, that policy coherence between and across multilateral processes has to be made. And so it's a challenge, and we are trying to convey that message to parties, that some of the issues you're discussing here, you have talked about it in the governing body of the ILO, sometimes in the governing body of the WHO. It's important for you as leaders to make that connection. And so it's just absolutely critical what you raise on policy coherence, not only within national countries, but across multilateral processes.
Fantastic, yeah. It's important to ensure that that kind of action isn't happening in parallel, in silo, and either coherence or maybe a different dynamic amongst the different multilateral forums. So thanks for that. We only have a few minutes left, so I will just ask the panelists quickly before we wrap up to maybe give a high-level kind of key takeaway from your contribution in regards to how your country, your organization sees the just transition and how that can support climate objectives.
Sure. Well, I would say in the case of Spain, it is super important what Diana was talking about before, which is social dialogue. I think in our case, our model is working or is in the process of work because we involve companies, the companies owning the coal power plants, the companies owning the coal mines, and the trade unions. And all support instruments and all social protection measures, etc., were tailored through the participation of the trade unions and companies and the national government. So social dialogue is basic. It makes it super complex because coordinating so many actors is complex, but it is worth it. And I would like to say also anticipation. Anticipation is key. And I was talking to Diana about this before the event. I think Spain is implementing the right kind of policies, but you could ask, is everything working on time? And the thing is that in Spain, coal mines closed in 2018, but the previous administrations did not anticipate just transition policies. So we are implementing them now as a reaction to coal phase-out. But in an ideal world, you would have implemented them before. So for the rest of the governments and organizations out there, anticipate the phase-out of fossil fuels. Don't wait for that to happen in order to implement just transition policies.
Fantastic. Diana and I will remind us that we do have a very short amount of time.
Brief.
So super
I
brief.
will just would like to follow up on what the last question and what Mustafa was saying, and it's about the definition of just transition. Workers have to be at the table, and I understand that just transition is now taken in all the different aspects. 2 years ago, no one talked about just transition. Now it's everywhere, but about what is this just transition? This has to be about workers, because if not, it's not a just transition, it's just a transition. Thank
Fantastic. Andres?
For Colombia, it's very important the just transition in the society, in the workforce. Our president calls his government as Colombia Potencia Mundial de la Vida, and is involved the all community, ethnical, indigenous, all and participate in this transition. So the focus in this government is the just transition not only in energy, but in other dimension, specific in the society, in the workforce.
Fantastic. Steve?
Yeah, for me, positive economic transformation is place-based. In Australia, in regions like the Hunter Valley, we could have 2 facilities side by side, and depending on their ownership structure, there's a completely different strategy. And so that needs to be taken into consideration, and and as part of that, you need to consider the needs of the whole community in forming a strategy.
And last but not least, Kamal?
Well, for me, I think all of us, what we want is ambition on climate change. But we have to realize that the ambition is not just about numbers. We can talk about 1.2, 1.5 degree. The ambition is about people. We have to work to empower workers, enterprises, communities to transform themselves. So only then will ambition be possible.
Fantastic. And I believe we are at time. I'm not getting a signal, but maybe we can, but I was told that we do need to finish on time. So thanks to all the panelists, and hopefully we can continue this discussion, or the discussion is continuing in the UNFCCC. So thanks again. Thanks to the Spanish Pavilion for having us, and happy COP28 Just Transition Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.